Wow, there's a lot. I
That's,
I've experienced some of the symptoms of I had a TBI myself in 2008. I was shot in my head, and the bullet when it went in my head, it broke into like little fragments, like all over the place. So like it messed up a lot of stuff. And so when I looked at your video interview you did a while ago, you talked about the trauma to the brain that it goes through, the cycles it goes through. And I noticed that I'm like, well, you call it cycle disruptions. And I've experienced headaches, vertigo, dizziness. I've been angry. I've been depressed, depressive state or whatever. Can you talk a little bit more about is it BET method? BHET? Is how you pronounce it?
yeah,
Okay.
it's the BET method. It's
That's
the brain hierarchy,
okay.
a brain hierarchical evaluation and treatment method.
Okay.
Now, hierarchy, if you look at the cover of my book, look on the cover, you will see there are some steps. It looks like a steps, almost like a pyramid, and you climb up steps, and the steps get larger as you go to the top. This is the reason why we had an artist come up with this design, because it shows that the brain works in levels.
Yes.
So what happens is the highest portion of your brain performs complex functions. So things like emotions, reading, writing, speaking.
Okay.
All of those that make us so-called human. These are functions that we need to have a lot of flexibility. They change from moment to moment. These are not what you call stereotypic behaviors. They're things that you need to modify according to what's going on in your environment.
Okay.
Those are the highest function. They come from the top of the brain. As you go down to the tail portion of the brain, what we refer to as the brainstem, the functions are not as sophisticated. They're more stereotypic, means that they do the same thing over and over. Just think about you. When you breathe, you don't have to think about it.
No, I don't.
There is a component of breathing that's controlled by the higher centers. That's when somebody said to you, take a deep breath, you consciously do that.
Yes.
But the lower centers actually continues keeping you breathing without you even thinking about it. So things like your heart rate, your blood pressure, even your body temperature to some degree, those are maintained without us thinking about it. Those are the simpler parts of the brain, but we call that the more primitive parts.
Okay.
So they tend to stick around longer in an injury. They're the last to go and the first to come back in an injury. The higher centers are the first to go and the last to come back in a way, depending on where the injury is. But that's a general rule of thumb.
Okay.
So clearly, hierarchy, the hierarchical concepts means that if you understand the brain in terms of how it's organized and how injury occurs to that organization, then you could target treatment. You could predict whether someone would get better or not, just based on the fact by understanding where in the organization of the brain there is disruption. So that's why the concept is hierarchical. Now, this has not been a concept that's been utilized in the medical community in a very consistent manner. So in my experience, I've found that having an understanding of, one, the organization of the brain, two, how the brain recovers in terms of the levels of organization, allows me to be able to target treatment. Looking at also what we call the natural history of how the brain is injured and recovers helps in this regard. So by clearly understanding at every stage of the game after an injury. So what happens when you get a brain injury and you go to the ICU or you go to the emergency room, and what we do to treat you is different from what happens when we treat somebody 5-10 years down the road with the effects of brain injury. Realizing that the brain is in a constant state of change.
Okay.
The term we use, if you saw one of my videos, I spoke about neuroplasticity.
Okay.
The brain has the capacity to constantly modify itself in order to adjust to the changes that occur with aging and also after injury.
Hmm.
So there are ways, in fact, that the brain naturally does that. And the brain does it sometimes with help from us and other times without help from us. So the brain recovers both on a structural and anatomic basis, the cells, the relationships to each other, the connections. But the brain also recovers from a neuropsychological standpoint.
Okay.
Because part of brain recovery is affected by our environment. If you expose to an environment where you have more negative effects, the brain tends to recover in a certain way that's not helpful to you. That's why people get depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive behavior. Many of these tendencies occur because the brain's way of adapting to the loss of function is to develop these clinical signs and symptoms. So, and that's why when you ask your first question, intervening early is so critically important because it helps the patient and the society in which the patient exists avoid some of the long-term or what we call the untoward effects of the injury.
So I guess also therapy helps that as well. Physical therapy, it helps that as well. Because I know my therapist, when I had physical therapy, she said, the brain, if you do something so many times, like repetitions are good as well. Your brain remembers certain things if you keep on doing it over and over again. Is that a part of neuroplasticity as well, or is that something totally different?
Yes. Well, the real issue with recovery is the whole idea of assisted by a therapist, and there are various therapists. You have the speech and language therapist that deals with the talking and the communications. Then you have the neuropsychologists who they're mostly involved in testing how the brain works, your memory, your concentration, your ability to perceive the environment, the attention span. They test all of those things. And the occupational therapists are more concerned with your functional activities, returning to work, school, your hand function, your balance, and some of those things. So there are various therapies that would be involved in this. And basically, most of what the therapist's role is to guide the nervous system. The nervous system recovers on its own in many ways. The therapist helps to guide. Certainly, doctors, we have the same function. We use medications also as an adjunctive way of providing support to the brain as it heals.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think you might have touched this, but I don't recall if I heard you say it. What inspired you to write your book?
Having been in the practice of neurologist for greater than 30 years, I've seen a lot of patients. I've also seen the situation in the marketplace where people with neurological injuries, particularly with traumatic brain injuries, they're not heard in the medical communities. They need a voice. They need a voice because many of the persons with brain injury themselves are not able to articulate
That's true.
the issue that they're having.
That's true.
And having the knowledge of what they go through, even though I've not had to my knowledge, I've not had an injury to my brain, I could well relate to what they're going through. And I feel having the opportunity to have seen so many patients gives me a chance to be that voice.
Yes.
Also, I believe that I'm in a place because I have many colleagues that I work with. Because of my knowledge of the field and experience, I'm able to provide some influence to encourage other professionals to literally treat patients in a way that makes sense and provide some kind of education to my colleagues in the field of neuroscience. So as to popularize these new models that are now emerging as to how we treat and evaluate patients with this condition. We're in a totally different era, and when you really think about it, the persons who are the loudest voice are the consumers, people like yourselves.
Yes.
And as a medical profession, we have not stepped up and lend our voices to this. Yesterday I had another interview, and I said that brain injury or traumatic brain injury is a science that's looking for a home. And right now in our field, there are not enough trained individuals offering these services. And even sometimes the ones that are trained have a poor understanding of the nature of the injury and the subjects that they're treating. So it's a sad commentary of the state that we're in these times. And my hope is that we could provide some kind of support for the community.
I read that in the book you said there's not very many people that, you think it's intimidation of not fully understanding how the brain works? And that's why people don't want to practice as much, or what do you think it is? It's not.
That's actually a very good question. And I'll ask this myself. And now the brain is a very complex structure. I mean, just writing this book was a challenge because even for neuroscientists and others in the field, it's very complicated to understand, much less the consumer. So when I was writing the book, first of all, the challenge for me was, how do I write this to a level that the ordinary person could read it and understand it?
Yes.
Because of the complexity. And as you could tell, I used a lot of stories and illustrations.
Like case studies. I saw that, like case studies.
And they illustrate points that are ordinarily very complex for others to understand. I've also used some models of examples like the Christmas tree, having a Christmas lights, or using a computer, how a car operates that people would understand. So there are similarities between those. But to answer your question more directly, the challenge in the marketplace, it's such a complex disorder. And for some people, they see it as a boring subject.
Yeah.
So most time when you say the brain, people sort of shut off and they're not paying attention. And so even with this book, coming out with it, it's kind of a fascinating to see people's response when you say, oh, I wrote a book on the brain. Wow, that's really complex. And people think it's difficult for them to read or understand.
I say you compare it to computer systems, like input and output of the monitor and printer and things like that. And I love computers. Like I'm kind of a nerd that way. And my brain didn't affect like my memory. It affected it, but not like to that extent. Because like when I was told what happened to me, that like my memory came back like a film roll. It was like a download. And I'm not sure if that's normal, but that's what happened. That was my experience. And so I never really had issues with that aspect of it. So that's why I can relate to how you compare it to computer systems. So I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense or whatever. So that was a good analogy to use to computers. So computers are complex as well. So that was a good analogy.
Well, I'm very encouraged to hear your description of how your memory came back, because certainly I've heard this before from many of my patients.
Really?
In that, a lot of times people with brain injury have the information stored. It's there. They just can't retrieve it. They can't get to it. But even though they're able to get to it, they can't take the time to assimilate it because the world is moving way too fast for them to keep up. And it's amazing to hear your own description using the computer jargon as to how this, I was downloading some information on my new iPhone to see have the correct connections, how long it takes to download. And again, that's really a great example of how the brain works in that sense. So I think this would be great and helpful for your listeners to understand.
Yes. So when you're not practicing, what do you like to do? What do you enjoy doing when you're not doing medical stuff?
Great question. Well, I'm an entrepreneur of some sorts. I'm involved in various businesses.
Okay.
And partly all related to healthcare. Outside of that, I love traveling. I'm on an airplane all the time, traveling to different countries, many times to give speeches and lectures and so forth. but I do take time off from time to time. I love to exercise. I'm not a gym rat, but I try to go whenever I have a chance. And of course, one of my favorite things to do, I love writing. Writing is something that actually, the ability to express yourself is a very important part of.
It really is. Myself through writing as well. I'm a writer too, so we have that in common. So what would you, beyond what you write in your book, what else would you tell somebody about brain injuries that's important to know?
Well, first, I think it's important, particularly for parents. That's always the area that I hear most from parents asking, did my child have an injury? And if they had one, would they recover? And how will that impact them in the future? Having a brain injury doesn't mean that's the end of your life. What's important is understanding the outcomes. What happened after the injury and how it affects the individual and how it affects society. Having an understanding of that is one of the best methods of healing. You don't understand why you are having a panic attack, why you're getting anxious, why you're not able to pay attention in school, why you're losing your temper, why you're feeling depressed. Obviously, your self-esteem really goes out the door. But I find that when my patients and their families and society come to a realization that there is a negative outcome from a brain injury, the patient and the society could make the necessary adaptation, or we could provide the therapeutic intervention or the treatment to this condition. So what I say to people, whenever there is a sense that something is not going right, get to the right professional to help that individual and their family understand what the true issues are. When that's done, you're on your way to treatment or to healing. I encourage others to do that. And the second point is the need for education, both in the medical community and in the, I'll say, medical community, the legal community, the advocacy community, the media, our politicians, friends, families. People need to be educated about this disorder. You saw the movie Concussion. That was an eye-opener for a lot of people about the effects of contact sports on the brain. And so this movie was rather transformative. In fact, it raised the awareness of a lot of people. So, of course, writing books like the one I did and shows like yours would help to provide the basis for some form of education for the outside world.
That's the overall point. That's the overall goal. Why I started this, because I believe a lot of people's stories are not shared, and it's. I mean, we have our own brain groups on Facebook and things like that, but it's like nobody else gets to see about it, hear about it. Like it needs to be more talked about than what it is. It shouldn't be a secret, so to speak. But it's just my personal.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you, and I really admire you for doing what you do, because there is someone out there that's listening to you, and of course just our conversation that could relate to you and your experience. And sometimes a lot of people believe that you have to go on TV or be in some kind of sophisticated environment to present an impact on people, but you could impact the world yourself just where you are in ways that you can't imagine. Just someone listening to us talking or you making comments about your own experience. I mean, I learned something from listening to you. So truly, I congratulate you and I encourage you to keep it up.
Thank you. So I'm gonna play a quick game. It's going real fast. So it's called This or That. I'm gonna give you a list of options. You choose one or the other. Do you prefer comedy movies or drama movies?
I like drama.
Really? I do too. ER or Grey's Anatomy?
Oh, tough one. I'll say ER.
ER. I do too. You have to cook or go out to eat?
Oh my Lord. I'm not a great cook, so I have to say go out to eat.
That's so so cool. So before we end, I want you to tell people where they can follow you and how to be in contact with you.
All right, my website is concussiontbi.com.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook at Dr. Kester Nedd.
Okay.
And you'll find me on Dr. Kester Nedd. And my Instagram is Dr.K_Nedd on Instagram. But
how can you find your book?
My book you could get on Amazon. You could just go onto Amazon Books. You put my name in, it'll come up. Or you could Kester Nedd, or you could put in you could put in the name of my book, which is Concussion, Traumatic from Head to Tail, or just under concussion, you'd find it, and you'll find the picture. The website is concussiontbi.com.
TBI.com. Okay.
You can also find it on there. You could order it from my website, and it'll refer you to, Barnes & Noble's online publisher, which is Archway Publishing. Those are all direct links, but most people get it from Amazon.
Okay. Well, I thank you again for your time. I've learned so much. It's an honor to talk with you. Can I ask one more question? Are you from the United States, or are you from another country?
I was born in Grenada in the Caribbean.
I can hear the accent.
It's a small island right next to South America.
Okay.
It's close to Trinidad and Tobago, but it's a little island there.
I know you got an accent. I'm like, I don't want to ask all this. I do want to ask. I don't want to ask. So, okay.
Well, thank you for recognizing that.
You're welcome. Again, thank you for this opportunity. I just started doing these interviews. Like you're like my fifth one. So to have a doctor like on the fifth one is like amazing to me. So I'm so honored that you took the time out of your day to talk with me, and I really appreciate it.
Well, great. I encourage you to keep up what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So that was TBI Uncovered, a closer look at TBIs with Dr. Nedd. And when I say he dropped so many jewels, like, I'm still like, wow. You could tell that he's very knowledgeable about TBIs and concussions. And I encourage you to get his book, Concussion, Traumatic Brain Injury from Head to Tail. It's a really good book. I started reading it myself. I'm not finished with it yet, but it's very interesting. And I love how he has it laid out towards like information and case studies, and he proves what he's talking about with, different things or whatever. So it's a very great book. So I encourage everyone to buy it, and also follow him on Facebook and Instagram. And also, like I said, I encourage you to buy his book. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But and I had information in the description below in the under the video. But I'm still like in awe of like all the knowledge that he laid out, and he gave us so much to think about, and how we don't think about things. People hit their heads and stuff. You think, oh, you just hit your head. It could be more serious than that. So it's very important to know when to get checked out for something, especially something such as a head injury or whatever. And concussions are so common, and like it's a silent epidemic, like you said on the book cover. It says a silent epidemic, so it's very common, more than we think it is. And so I'm just so like amazed, and I'm just absorbing it. Like it's still, my mind is on overload. But I enjoyed the interview, and I'm so thankful for him to take the time out to talk with me. Like I said, it's such an honor to have somebody of such prestige to talk to, and he's such a humble person. So I really appreciate him doing the interview with me. And it was very fun. And like I said, I learned so much, so many gems that he dropped, so many gems and things to take in consideration.